a lot of times the people that are in the right don't always win.
Yes.
I mean, just because you win a court case doesn't mean that you were right.
Yeah, exactly.
And so taking it in context. I had one last question for you. I know we spent a lot of time now, and that has to do with during the time of Philo of Alexandria, there was a Jewish community called Therapeutae. Am I pronouncing it?
Yeah.
Yes, where women were equal and not like the Essenes who excluded women. And I was wondering if you could say something about that particular community. That seemed very interesting in Egypt.
Well, the Egyptian Jewish community was very diverse and was very interesting. I think the Therapeutae are one of the more interesting of them, the fact that women played an equal part. And, I mean, Philo is a funny guy. He wrote, I've got all Philo's works here, and if you read through them, he doesn't mention once the Jewish temple, which was functioning in the Delta. And that omission is very telling. You need to ask the question, why didn't he mention it? I don't know, but I suspect that in some way it was connected with the Therapeutae, because the Therapeutae were a very mystical group. Their attitude towards the Old Testament was not dogmatic or fundamentalist. They saw it as metaphor. They saw it as a means of a mystical, experiential approach to spiritual knowledge. I mean, I'd hesitate to call them Gnostics, but they were certainly operating in the same general area. I find them a fascinating group, and I wish that perhaps that had more influence on what subsequently became rabbinical Judaism.
Did you visit this place in Egypt?
It doesn't exist anymore. Do
we know where it was?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
No, it was slightly west of Alexandria, near Lake Mareotis, but there's a New Zealand professor, in fact, Joan Taylor, who is the only person I know who's done a considerable amount of work on this, and she thinks she's more or less located it, but she's not certain until she can raise some money to dig. She's never going to know, even if there's anything there. But reading Philo's account, I don't think there'd be much there, because they lived a very simple life with very simple buildings. I just don't think you'd find anything that was distinctive.
How do we even know about them then?
We only know what Philo wrote about them.
Okay.
And that's, as we've discussed, they took the Old Testament as metaphor, not as literal truth, which is very different. They seem to have had a sort of a kind of Kabbalistic approach too, because they were very involved in the numbers of days, the numbers and in numerology, say, things like this, which brings them into the orbit of the Book of Jubilees, for example, or the Book of Enoch, which then brings them vaguely into the orbit of some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which some of the scrolls express this sort of numerical symbolism. So Philo is giving us a fragment of something greater, but we don't actually know what this something greater was and how much communication the Therapeutae, for example, had with other possible similar groups around the Middle East at the time. There just isn't any information. I mean, this is a frustrating thing about all this. You see, the problem is the Jewish community in Alexandria rose in insurrection around about 115 AD. No one knows why. There was a fellow called Lucas who led it. No one knows who he was or what his ideas were, but the whole Jewish community was utterly destroyed and all their records were burned and lost. So whatever might have been in some of the libraries there has gone. What would be nice, of course, is if they're building a road sometime in Alexandria and a bulldozer happens to uncover a house of a wealthy Jewish intellectual, and there happen to be a whole lot of documents there. I mean, that would be nice, but it hasn't happened yet.
Reminds me, though, of Michael Cremo's experience of archaeology, that poses something different than a worldview that's been integrated and absorbed will be cast aside. And I'm just wondering if you feel that that would happen.
Well, that certainly happens. I mean, they found a whole lot of Jewish documents. The Saudi Arabians were building a road through the remains of a very big walled Jewish trading city in Arabia, a place called Khaybar, which Muhammad took sort of early 7th century. And they were building this road, and they uncovered a library with a whole lot of scrolls and books and so on, codices and so on. And the Saudis just would have destroyed them. But a guy I know bought the whole lot, and they're all now in a vault in Switzerland. But, you know, they're not much use in a vault in Switzerland. They keep trying to get him to release them to scholars or let people look through them. But
what's the fear? That he won't get them back?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I really don't know. He's got a lot of stuff, actually, a ton of stuff. He spends a lot of money, I mean, millions and millions on this kind of material. But he just likes it. He sort of keeps it and looks at it and shows a few friends what he's got. You know, he's shown me a few things that are pretty mind-boggling.
You have good friends. I have one last question for you. It's a personal question. You can always take the fifth. Do you believe in reincarnation?
I do. I've had experience of about 7 of my own.
I do too. When you were describing what went on in Egypt on some of these tours, it reminded me of them having a recalling the place.
Quite possible. No, when I was in my early 20s, I had quite a few... I'd drop into this other life for sort of 30 seconds, and and all the memory would come back. You know, it was self-evidently true. But I started sort of investigating them a bit, and then I thought, well, hang on, this is ridiculous, because I've got this life to live, and I've got this life to do things, and if I start getting obsessed with previous ones, it's not going to help. It's crazy. So I figured that the reason why I was dropping into these things was there was something I needed to learn from them. And once I figured that out, and I figured out what I needed to learn from them, I then stopped. And so by sort of my mid-20s, it never happened again, because there was no longer a point. I was getting on with what I had to do now.
What's your next project, Michael?
I'm having a bit of a break at the moment. I'm not... I've got a few sort of ideas, but I'm not writing any non-fiction at the moment. I just had this idea that I'd like to tell a story. So I'm writing this. I'm about 300 pages or so into a book set in medieval times. It's just a story, nothing more. I'm not trying to win any prizes for literary excellence or anything like this. It's simply a story. I just thought, you know, the true calling of a writer really is to be able to sit down and tell a story to the kids. It just seemed to me that I wanted something simple, because after 12 books in English that are quite complicated, I suddenly had this hankering for simplicity, and this was a way of dealing with it.
I don't blame you. I mean, if you took a hiatus on even writing anything, I would understand. You've earned your right to not write. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Oh, a million things, but we don't have time.
Well, I thank you so much for being our guest and taking so much time to talk with us and share where you're at and the many things that have happened to you and the many discoveries you've had. I hope that you will join me again at another time, and thank you so much.
Anytime you like. Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.